A missing girl was hidden, a fire erased the trail, and no one knew until a silent dog began to dig. The man behind it all was someone trusted, someone who should have protected her. But Daniel Mercer followed the only witness left, his dog Shadow, and uncovered what everyone else had missed. And just wait until you hear the twist that brought justice back from the ashes. The wind swept through the pine trees outside Daniel Mercer's cabin, whistling through the gaps in the weathered wood. Inside, the air was still, almost stale, with nothing but the occasional creak of old floorboards and the low hum of a space heater. The walls bore no photos, no laughter echoed through the rooms. It had been nearly 2 years since his world ended in a twisted wreck of steel and silence. Daniel hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks. Once, he had been a rescue specialist, strong, dependable, the first one into danger zones when others held back. But after losing his wife, Elena, in a collision that should have taken him instead, something inside him had broken beyond repair. The medals on his shelf didn't mean anything anymore. Neither did the phone calls he never returned, or the invitations he quietly threw away. He needed solitude like others needed air. Each morning was the same. Coffee, walk into the woods, sit, come back. Nightmares took care of the rest. Then came the night that fractured the pattern. Daniel had left the TV on in the background, something he rarely did. Static-filled local news flickered across the screen, showing the aftermath of a fire. Brookside Animal Shelter. The footage was quick and unpolished. Firefighters dragging hoses through blackened rubble, burnt cages, thick smoke curling into the gray Oregon sky. A devastating blaze late last night claimed the lives of dozens of animals. Several were rescued, including this German Shepherd mix. The camera panned, just for a moment. A metal crate. Inside, a dog. Fur singed along its flank. Nose pressed to the bars. Eyes wide, glassy with panic, but still aware, alive. The image only lasted 2 seconds. That's all it took. Daniel didn't know what moved him. Maybe it was the look. Maybe it was the helplessness he recognized in the dog's shaking body. The same helplessness he felt when he stood over his wife's body that night and couldn't save her. Whatever it was, he grabbed his keys before the broadcast even finished. The shelter was over 3 hours away. The road was long and empty, winding past fog-draped forests and stretches of broken pavement. He barely remembered the drive. When he arrived, the shelter smelled like bleach and damp concrete. Volunteers in bright shirts moved quickly, sorting animals, reviewing reports. No one paid much attention to him until he said, "The dog from the fire, the one with the burns. I want to see him." They brought him to a small recovery kennel. Inside, curled in the far corner, lay the same dog from the broadcast. The burns were worse up close. Patches of pink skin beneath scorched fur, a deep scratch along the side of its snout. But the eyes, those eyes were still watching, still waiting. As Daniel stepped closer, the dog didn't move. No bark, no growl, just quiet, breathless trembling. "He's not doing well," said the volunteer gently. "Won't eat, won't respond. No microchip, no name. He's traumatized." Daniel didn't look away. He crouched slowly, letting the silence stretch. "We get a lot of dogs with rough pasts," the volunteer continued. "Sometimes they shut down. We're not sure how long he was inside before the firefighters got him out. He doesn't trust anyone. If you're looking for a family pet—" "I'm not," Daniel said. He stood, eyes still locked with the dog's. "I'll take him." There was a pause. The volunteer blinked. "Sir, are you sure? Most people want—" "I said I'll take him." The paperwork was fast-tracked. Daniel didn't ask for a discount or a receipt. He just signed where they told him to and led the dog, shaking but obedient, to the car. He didn't name him right away. That night, back in the cabin, the dog lay curled on the rug near the fireplace, eyes open even as his body sagged from exhaustion.
Daniel sat nearby, sipping bitter coffee. The silence between them was heavy, but not unfamiliar. "You and me," Daniel said quietly. "We're both ghosts." The dog shifted slightly, but didn't look away. Daniel set his mug down. "I'll call you Shadow," he said. "Seems like you've been living in one." And from that moment, without knowing why, the two broken souls began to orbit each other, drawn together by something neither of them could explain yet. Not grief, not survival, something else. Something waiting in the dark. Something that hadn't finished yet.
The days that followed Shadow's arrival at the cabin were quiet, but not peaceful. Daniel noticed it immediately. The dog didn't bark. He didn't wag his tail or show curiosity about his new surroundings. Most animals, even the skittish ones, eventually adjusted. But Shadow moved like a ghost through the house, drifting from room to room with silent steps, as if afraid he didn't belong in the world anymore. He slept with his eyes half open, flinching at every creak in the walls or gust of wind that passed through the trees. He didn't touch his food unless Daniel left the room. He didn't respond to toys or calls or treats. And when Daniel sat on the porch in the evenings, Shadow would simply lie down nearby, not seeking affection, but never straying too far either. There was a kind of understanding between them, a quiet agreement of mutual space. Daniel didn't push, and the dog didn't run. But something changed when they went outside. It started during their walks behind the cabin. The trails Daniel had cleared years ago wound through thick pine woods, overgrown brush, and patches of moss-covered rock. For the first few days, Shadow would follow at a slow pace, nose low, ears flat, like he was moving through dangerous territory. But there was one place, always the same, where his demeanor shifted. About half a mile out, near a jagged slope where the forest thinned and the land dipped sharply into shadows, Shadow would stop cold. He'd stare at the rocks, sniffing the air as if it held a message only he could understand. Then he'd begin to whine, low, mournful, and scratch at the ground with slow, methodical urgency. At first, Daniel dismissed it. The dog was traumatized. Dogs fixated on smells all the time. Maybe there were remains of an animal. Maybe it was just instinct. Still, Daniel found himself watching Shadow more closely with each visit to that spot. Because it wasn't just once, it happened every time. Days passed, and Shadow's behavior grew more intense. The whining became sharper, the scratching more frantic. He began pulling at his leash, wanting to go further than Daniel would allow. The same tension returned to his body, shoulders stiff, tail low, eyes darting. Something was wrong, and Shadow knew it. Then came the night everything broke open. It was just after sunset, and the forest had fallen into that eerie gray silence that comes before true dark. Daniel and Shadow were returning from their usual walk. The leash hung loosely from Daniel's hand, and they were a few minutes from home when Shadow suddenly stopped. His ear snapped forward, muscles coiled, and without a sound, he took off, bolt straight into the trees, the leash slipping from Daniel's grip. "Shadow!" Daniel shouted, stumbling forward, branches whipping across his jacket. He hadn't run in months, and his heart hammered as he crashed through the undergrowth, following the flashes of movement ahead. Shadow didn't slow. He darted through the brush with purpose, weaving through narrow gaps in the trees and leaping over roots. Finally, he skidded to a stop at the base of the rocky slope, the same place where he always hesitated, and began barking. For the first time. It wasn't aggressive, it was urgent, desperate. Daniel caught up, panting hard, and found the dog clawing at something hidden beneath a tangle of leaves and fallen branches. A log, partly rotted, wedged into the side of the hill. Shadow barked again, loud and sharp, then began to dig. Daniel dropped to his knees beside him. "What is it?" he muttered, brushing away debris with his hands. That's when he saw it. A flash of faded pink, the edge of a small mud-covered shoe. Daniel's breath caught. He hesitated, just for a second, then gripped the log and pulled it aside. Underneath, the soil was loose, disturbed. Something had been buried here.
The rest unfolded in a blur. Daniel called the sheriff's office, speaking quickly but clearly. Within the hour, deputies arrived and cordoned off the area. The unearthed shoe was just the beginning. Under several inches of packed earth, they discovered a small duffel bag, worn, stained, zipped shut. Inside were items no one wanted to see. A child's backpack, a weather-worn shirt with dried stains, and a hospital wristband bearing a name written in faded black ink. Lena Pritchard. The officers exchanged looks. One of them, a younger deputy, swallowed hard. She went missing 6 weeks ago. 7-year-old girl, foster system. Disappeared from a group home not far from the Brookside area. No leads, until now. Daniel didn't say anything. He just stared at Shadow, who now sat quietly beside the hole he had uncovered, tail curled tight around his body. His head was low, but his eyes stayed fixed on the disturbed ground, like he was still watching, still remembering. There was no howling that night, no cries, only the distant crackle of radios and shuffling boots as officers documented the scene. Daniel stood in the dark woods beside the one creature who had seen what no one else had, and found what everyone else had missed. Shadow hadn't just survived. He had remembered.
The discovery at the base of the rocky slope left a mark on Daniel Mercer's mind that refused to fade. Despite the grim findings, evidence bags, shaken deputies, and the quiet confirmation that Lena Pritchard had indeed vanished without a trace, there was no body, no definitive proof of what had happened. The only things that remained were questions, and Daniel had never been good at leaving questions unanswered. Over the following days, the local authorities treated the scene seriously. The sheriff's office combed the area near the cabin. Cadaver dogs were brought in. Drones scanned the forest canopy. Nothing, as if the girl had been there and then disappeared again. But the items retrieved were indisputable. A child's backpack, a blood-stained shirt, and most telling of all, a hospital wristband, scorched at the edges, bearing the name Lena Pritchard, age 7. Her missing persons report, which Daniel requested a copy of, offered a timeline. Lena had been staying at a temporary foster care home in the outskirts of Brookside. She vanished after school one Friday afternoon. No witnesses, no forced entry, just gone. And 3 days later, coincidence or not, the Brookside Animal Shelter burned to the ground. The more Daniel thought about it, the more the timeline felt wrong, or rather, connected. He remembered what the shelter worker had told him when he first adopted Shadow. He was one of the last ones we pulled out, tucked way in the back, corner pen. That pen, according to the old shelter layout he found online, would have been just feet from the utility storage room. And that room, based on news footage and incident reports, had suffered the most structural damage in the fire. Daniel's gut tightened. What if Shadow hadn't been the only living being in that room? And if Lena had somehow ended up at the shelter, what had brought her there? He decided to go back. The shelter site was fenced off now. A yellow warning sign flapped weakly in the wind. Charred beams and collapsed walls lay like skeletons in the dirt. Weeds had started to push through the ashes, and rust clung to every twisted piece of fencing. But the silence that surrounded the place felt unnatural, like the land itself hadn't recovered. Shadow's ears perked the moment they neared the outer boundary. No hesitation this time. His pace quickened, his nose twitched. Daniel kept his grip loose on the leash, letting the dog guide him along the scorched gravel. They stepped through a gap in the chain link. Inside, it was as if time had frozen mid-chaos. Melted kennel bars curved like wilted flowers. A scorched clipboard still hung by one nail. The air smelled faintly of smoke, even after all this time. Shadow didn't waste a second. He moved straight toward the collapsed northwest corner, the same area Daniel had read about in the fire report. The dog stopped abruptly, then started circling.
whining, sniffing aggressively at a shallow depression in the debris. Daniel knelt beside him, brushing aside blackened wood and brittle leaves. Something small and light caught his fingers. Half buried beneath ash and a layer of mud, he uncovered it. A plastic inhaler, melted at the tip. It was pink. Faded stickers peeled away from the sides. A child's name was barely visible beneath the grime. Daniel's chest tightened. According to Lena's medical file, she had chronic asthma. She never went anywhere without her inhaler. A social worker had even mentioned it during her intake, how she panicked without it. This couldn't be a coincidence. He sat back on his heels, inhaler in hand. Shadow stood beside him, watching, waiting. There was no more room for doubt. Lena had been here. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. His thoughts ran in tight circles, never settling. Someone had hidden that duffel bag. Someone had made sure that what happened to Lena would stay buried, literally. But that same someone hadn't counted on a dog surviving the fire. And not just surviving, but remembering. Daniel looked down at Shadow, curled up near the fireplace, eyes still open, still alert. "You saw her, didn't you?" he whispered. Shadow's ears flicked, but he didn't move. This wasn't just about a burned shelter or a missing child anymore. Something had happened in those 3 days between Lena's disappearance and the fire. Something dark, something carefully erased, until Shadow led Daniel back into the embers. And Daniel Mercer, a man who had once sworn he was done chasing ghosts, felt the fire inside him rekindle. He was going to find out the truth, whatever it took.
Once the inhaler turned up beneath the rubble, the pattern stopped feeling like a coincidence and started looking like intent. A child had been hidden, a building had burned, and the one creature who might have witnessed the truth had come home with Daniel. He reported everything: locations, timestamps, even the exact route Shadow had taken to the rocky slope. The sheriff listened, took notes, sent more teams. But without a living witness, the case could only circle the same questions. So Daniel went back to the only compass that hadn't failed him: Shadow's memory. He prepared with the discipline of his old search and rescue days, almost despite himself. He laid out a small pack on the kitchen table: map, compass, water filter, energy bars, a soft lead, an emergency blanket, a headlamp, and a bright whistle. He debated the radio, then added it anyway. He told himself he was just walking, but the pack said otherwise. Before he stepped off the porch, he texted a deputy he trusted, a quick note with a pinned location and a simple line: "Following the dog. If we don't check in by tomorrow night, call me." The first day on foot, Shadow moved like a tracking wire pulled taut. He kept close to Daniel's knee on the open stretches, then surged ahead in the tighter corridors of brush as scents braided through the cool air. They crossed an old service road half swallowed by ferns, then a dry creek bed where crushed bottle glass winked in the light. Shadow paused often to taste the wind, circling once, twice, then choosing a direction with quiet certainty. Daniel let him lead. He kept the leash slack, his steps careful. He marked notable trees with mental photographs: lightning scar, twin trunks, woodpecker holes, so they could backtrack if needed. When they stopped to rest, Shadow didn't truly rest. He watched the tree line as if expecting something to step out of it. Daniel split a bar, palmed the larger half, and slid the smaller piece toward the dog. Shadow took it, then glanced back to the trees. They camped lightly beneath a stand of firs when the sky dimmed to cold pewter. Daniel set the emergency blanket as a windbreak and kept the headlamp off to let their eyes adjust. He listened to the forest breathe, crickets ticking, an owl somewhere upslope. Each sound, ordinary on any other night, felt like code. He slept in short, guarded intervals. Each time he stirred, Shadow's head was already up, ears pricked. On the second morning, they angled deeper into country even locals rarely visited. The trail, such as it was, faded to suggestion. Bramble tugged at Daniel's pants and the sun filtered down in narrow, dusty bars.
Around midday, Shadow halted at a fork of game paths and stood motionless, nose high. The wind shifted. He took off, no panic, just a swift decision, angling northwest along a faint ridge. Half an hour later, they found it. At first, it was only a geometry interrupting trees, a rectangle of gray boards sunk into earth and time. Then the details surfaced, sun-bleached signage with the outline of a pine cone, a rusted hook where a lantern might have hung, a snapped antenna tilting like a broken mast. An old ranger outpost, long abandoned. The steps were mostly missing, so Daniel boosted Shadow up first and climbed after him, testing each board for give. Shadow's bark broke the quiet, startling in its power. Not fearful, summoning. "Easy," Daniel said, one hand hovering near the latch. The other set the headlamp, unlit, back into his pocket. He'd seen structures like this collapse under a breath. He shouldered the door slowly. It resisted, then sighed inward. Cool, stale air pushed past them. Dust motes spun in the narrow light. Old maps curled on a nail. A metal cup lay on its side beneath a shelf. The place smelled of damp wood and old paper, and something faintly human, recent, threaded through the age. Shadow shot to the far corner, past an overturned chair and a stack of brittle field reports. There, where the floorboards met the wall, lay a mound of blankets and a flattened sleeping bag. Shadow nosed the edge and gave a short, urgent whine. The blankets moved. Daniel's breath caught. He crouched, palms open and visible, setting his voice to the calm, even register he used to use with people in the worst hours of their lives. "My name is Daniel," he said. "You're safe now. We're here to help." The blanket shifted again, slower this time, and a face edged into view, a small face, pinched with hunger and caution, eyes too large in the dim. Hair tangled, lips dry. She stared first at Daniel, then at Shadow, and it was the dog, more than the man, who untied the knot in her gaze. Shadow scooted closer on his belly, tail low, ear soft. He didn't lick or paw, he simply pressed his shoulder against the blankets as if anchoring them to the floor. The girl's fingers lifted and found the thick fur at his neck. She gripped tight, not in fear, but to confirm he was real. "Lena," Daniel whispered, the name landing with the wonder of a prayer discovered on a note. She blinked, throat working. When she spoke, her voice sounded like something unused being asked to remember how. "I knew you'd come back," she said to Shadow, barely louder than breathing. "I told myself you would." Daniel swallowed the sudden heat behind his eyes and shifted into motion. He moved slowly, no sudden gestures, talking through every choice like narrating a simple recipe. "I'm going to get you some water, okay? Small sips. Then we'll wrap you in something warm. Shadow and I will stay right here." He slid a water bottle from his pack and cracked the cap so it wouldn't hiss. He offered it and waited. She reached with her free hand but didn't let go of Shadow's collar. Her first sip was tentative, the next more sure. Daniel tore open a soft granola bar and broke it into thumbnail pieces, letting her set the pace. He draped the emergency blanket over her shoulders, tucking it close but not tight. Her eyes tracked each motion, wary but steady. "Can you tell me if anything hurts?" he asked gently. She shook her head, a small, careful movement. "Just tired." "Okay, tired is okay," he said, meaning it. Tired meant time. "We'll get you seen by a doctor. We're going to go slow and stay together." Outside, the afternoon light slanted, turning dust into a quiet snowfall in the doorway. Daniel took a long breath, reached for the radio, and keyed it twice, 2 patient clicks that would mean "contact soon" to anyone listening and "I'm not leaving" to himself. He glanced at Shadow. The dog had gone perfectly still, as if any show of excitement might break the moment. Lena's hand stayed at his collar, resting there like it had finally reached a shore. In the old ranger outpost, time loosened its grip. There was the girl, alive. There was the dog, who had remembered. And there was Daniel Mercer, once a man who had sworn off rescues, kneeling on worn boards, building a bridge back to daylight, one quiet step at a time.
The sirens echoed faintly through the trees as the helicopter lifted off from the nearest clearing. Inside, Lena sat wrapped in a thermal blanket, her small frame strapped securely to the stretcher. A medic monitored her vitals, murmuring gently as the child stared out the window at the receding forest below. Her fingers still clutched a strip of Daniel's old scarf, something he had left with her as she was loaded aboard, something that still smelled faintly of wood smoke and fur. Daniel stood on the ridge as the rotors faded into distance, shadow beside him. The girl was safe. For now, that was enough. At the hospital, doctors confirmed what Daniel already feared. Lena was severely malnourished and dehydrated, but her body was strong, resilient. She would recover. And, more importantly, she was lucid. Her mind, though worn from the ordeal, was sharp, observant, and brave enough to begin telling the truth. Her story, when it reached the public, sent ripples of shock through the quiet town of Brookside. Lena had been taken not by a stranger, but by someone who had earned the trust of those around him, a staff member from the animal shelter. The man had a history of disciplinary transfers sealed under administrative privacy. He had worked the night shift. He had access. He knew how to avoid being seen. And by the time the foster home realized Lena was missing, he had already taken her deep into the wooden outskirts. She didn't remember everything. Trauma had blurred some of the timelines. But she remembered hiding. She remembered the shelter, cold, loud, frightening. She remembered a woman there, a kind volunteer, who tried to protect her. The woman had tucked her into a back room, one filled with supplies and kennels, told her to stay quiet, to wait, and then the fire came. The woman never returned. After the flames died down, Lena escaped through a broken wall panel, frightened and alone. That's when she saw the dog, scorched but breathing. She thought he was following her. Maybe he was. She didn't know. Shadow had been more than a survivor of the fire. He had witnessed it. And, somehow, he had remembered. Daniel never claimed credit. The press tried to call him a hero. Veteran tracks missing girl through Oregon wilderness made headlines across the state. But every time a reporter approached, he simply redirected them. Shadow saved her, he said, not once, but every time. When Lena was placed into protective care, it was Daniel's name she requested to keep on her contact sheet. She visited weekly. Sometimes they just sat on the cabin porch, Shadow's head in her lap. Other times, she and Daniel would walk the woods together, retracing the paths she'd once taken alone. She spoke more each visit, laughed more, grew stronger. She still flinched at sudden sounds. She still had nightmares. But she also had something no one could have expected: trust. In Daniel, in Shadow, in safety. The investigation into her abduction was officially reopened within days of her testimony. With her detailed account, physical evidence from the shelter site, and records of staff movement, the authorities built a solid case. The man responsible was arrested without incident. For the first time in years, Daniel watched the legal system move swiftly and justly. The relief in that alone was a kind of healing. But the deeper healing came slowly, quietly. Daniel began volunteering with local shelters, not to adopt again, but to help train and rehabilitate dogs who had suffered, like Shadow once had. He knew their silence, their fear. He understood how to give space instead of pressure, presence instead of pity. Shadow often accompanied him, and it became a quiet legend in the county. The dog who had found a child, now helping others find their footing too. Lena's words stuck with everyone who met her. "Shadow's my guardian," she'd say with unshakable certainty, "and Daniel is his." That was how she saw it. That was how she lived. Seasons changed. Snow came and went. The cabin no longer felt like a shelter from the world, but a home returning to life. Photographs began to appear on the mantel, small ones, quiet ones. Lena feeding Shadow a biscuit. Shadow asleep with his paw across her sneakers. Daniel caught in the background, smiling softly. For a long time, Daniel hadn't believed in second chances. He thought the door had closed behind him the day he lost his wife. But life, unpredictable and unforgiving, had left one open. Shadow had led him through it. What the dog remembered had saved a life. And in doing so,
He gave 2 others, one hardened by sorrow, one scarred by fear, a reason to begin again. Not in the dramatic sense, not in the headlines or interviews, but in the quiet triumph of breath, laughter, safety, and the bond that needed no words.